Hello, everybody. Welcome to Theology Unbound. I am one of your hosts, Jordan. This is my wife, Tiffany.
Hi.
We are on episode 18, and today we're going to kind of continue our conversation of what the Christian family should look like. Well, we're going to really start today on the Christian family, but we're continuing our conversation from what the nation looks like or what we desire the nation to look like to now the Christian family. And we're going to talk about things like education, raising your children, discipline, and patriarchy. So here we go. All right. Well, this is actually our second attempt to record this. We have our children with us in the room right now, and they're being really good, but we have an 8-month-old baby who really wants to crawl around, and he might make some noise. So you will hear a little bit of noise. We figured we got to have the children with us.
Well, there's very little other option.
Yeah, currently at this moment there is. So I don't remember everything I said in the previous intro, and that's okay because you're not going to hear it anyways because we just had to restart.
The baby was pulling on all the cords. It was crazy.
We're going to take this conversation from where me and Mark had left off, right? I think when people listen to a Christian pastor talk about government and politics, the danger is that they get you can get closed off and you can say, the church should have nothing to do with politics and the church shouldn't have anything to do with government per se. And I disagree in the sense that politics themselves are corrupt, no doubt.
Oh, yeah.
Government is corrupt because of politics. But government, what I argued for the last 2 episodes and what I believe the Bible teaches is a God-ordained institution that is for good. And
Absolutely.
It should be for good, just like the family and just like the church.
In conversations that I've had with people, when you hear the term Christian nationalism, often there's this guttural knee-jerk reaction because of internalized understandings and definitions of what that means, really taught from liberal media, which has demonized it and said that, Christian nationalism is a bunch of Christians who are militantly going around and they want to force people to become Christians and turn it into a Christian Sharia law. Yeah. That's not what we're talking about. And that's not the idea even. Christian nationalism in essence is we desire a Christian based nation. And a nation is more than just its government. A nation is its people, its families, its culture, its education. Every tier of that country we want to see have a Christian influence. And I think influence is really the key word there. It's not that we're taking over and going to, force everyone to do the specific things that we want, but we want Christian influence to be the primary cultural bedrock that our nation is built on, like it was in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of this goes back to the natural things that God created good. And then the gospel of grace coming in to perfect those natural things. And a lot of I would say a lot of the founding fathers were deists. Some of them were Christian, yes, but a lot of them were deists, and they derived their idea from the Bible, but also God's natural law and the natural order of things. And so we can for sure say there's no neutral ground.
No.
There is no neutral ground. It's either going to be taken over by secularism or Christians have to maintain the culture, to be the salt and the light, to preserve it, to keep it on the right direction. And a perfect example of this is you can either have, Christian culture that has Christian bookstores and Christian coffee shops and Christian businesses that's ran by biblical law, or you can have drag queen story hour and nude gay men walking in the parade, flashing their genitalia at your children.
Yeah, and I really liked that Mark was talking about worldviews because, and I really want listeners to take this to heart. There is no such thing as a neutral worldview.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a neutral government, as a neutral nation, as a neutral education system even. And I think of it usually in terms of the education system because you cannot teach without propagating some type of worldview, especially in like your literature classes, in your history classes. And so you have to make the choice. Am I going to teach with the presupposition of, secularism, of postmodernism, of even as far as like Islam, or am I going to teach with the presupposition of this world was created by God, of, men and women were created with a purpose, of, the principles of Christianity that should be the presupposition that we teach with. And this infiltrates in all areas of life, not just education. So you really have to make that choice. And when presented in that way, I don't think it's such a difficult concept or even such a controversial concept of, as a Christian, I would rather have a Christian society than an atheist-based society, because atheism is not neutral.
Yeah. And in our country today, I would say we are at a civil war. It's not a hot civil war, but we are certainly divided like crazy. And you have conservative states and you have liberal states. And it's more like woke states than it is liberal. I mean, we use the word liberal, but the woke agenda is more what's taken over. And a good example of this would be we grew up in Nevada. We went to Bible college in California together. We got married there, and then we moved to Idaho. And one of the things that you learn when you move to a conservative state from a woke state is that the people here don't want you to come here to change this place. They want this place to stay the way it is, conservative, and they know you're leaving where you are at, whether it be California or Washington or Oregon or any of those, really particularly the states on the west of us. They don't want you to bring that here to try to change this.
Yeah, when you move here,
they want you to come here and assimilate to the culture that's already here. And that I'm saying that on a bigger scale for the whole nation. I want people that immigrate. I'm not against immigration at all. I want people to come, but I want them to be assimilated into our culture, which I would like to be predominantly Christian.
I think it's interesting because and this is a technique that's used in apologetics and other ways of sorting through things with logic. When you shrink the problem, it becomes a little bit easier to sort through when it's complex to think about, or there are presuppositions that we've internalized that we don't realize. If you shrink the idea of a Christian nation down to your home or down to your state or even your city, it's not so difficult to imagine, hey, I want my family to have a fence around it. I want my home to have certain sacredness of, no one can just decide to come into my home and decide they want to plant themselves on my couch and not leave.
Right.
And no one can decide to come and say, well, I'm going to teach your kids what I think they should learn. No, I'm going to teach my kids Christian principles. I'm going to teach my kids a more solid education because as their parent, I think we know what's best. Same with my town or with our state. When people move to Idaho, there's a little distrust initially because they want to know that you have the same set of values that they do. And if you don't, they don't want you here because you're changing the voter base, you're changing the culture of their city. We've seen small amounts of liberalism because of all the people moving here leaking into Idaho culture, and those who have been here for a while are really saddened by that, and they're protective against seeing what's been a really safe place for their families changed. So in the same way, if we look at our nation on the whole, we need to protect that, and it's okay to do so. It's not a wrong thing. It's not an immoral thing to do that.
So yeah, it's a pejorative term, Christian nationalism. Oh, that's a bad thing.
Could you explain what pejorative means? You guys have used that a few times, and I think myself included, listeners are a little confused.
It's a term that is used by one side against another side to paint a picture of what it really isn't. So it's a lie, basically.
Yeah.
So you take a term, and there's other pejorative terms. For instance, we talked about this before, replacement theology. That's a pejorative term.
Okay.
You're taking a term and you're putting something to it that the person who holds to it would never actually call themselves.
So they're changing the definitions of words and titles, adding a smear to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And other political terms are similar. Fascism is one that's been developed to describe.
You're a Nazi.
Yeah,
Hitler.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's so pejorative term. I'm saying yes, Christian nationalism. It's a pejorative term that had been taken over. But when we think logically through these things, I'm okay. We need to define what Christian nationalism means, and we need to think outside of just politics. I'm talking culture. I want to live in such a Christianized culture that the social pressures for a man and a wife to get divorced is so great on them, it's not even an option.
Yeah.
You know, in the 30s and the 40s, divorce wasn't even a word mentioned.
Yeah. You
People
could
would
be
talk about
unhappy in that marriage, but you stuck together, and lo and behold, you found out over time that those feelings didn't last forever.
Yeah.
And you were able to have these marriages that we see now in some of our older generations that lasted for decades.
Yeah. Yeah. So this will take us into really the next pejorative term, which is patriarchy. When we talk about patriarchy, we're talking about the male headship of the home and male rule. And this all ties into what we want to talk about with raising our children, educating our children.
Yeah.
You know, just the way the household runs, the umbrella of the house, how it actually works. One of the most important things to remember is that the Bible is clear. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, or they should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Ephesians, fathers, don't provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline of the Lord. Psalm 78, we will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generations the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done. Colossians 3, fathers, don't provoke your children lest they become discouraged. So you see this idea of men leading their children, teaching their children, and obviously they can't do this all on their own. That's why they need the helpmate from the wife.
Yeah.
And here's where the wife's role is so important. And, you know, we see this all over social media where you have women who are just depressed and sad, and they think they're really doing the things that are giving them freedom, but they're not. You know, they're
feminism
not.
has sold such a false bill of goods to women. And, you know, like you were talking about patriarchy being this pejorative term, because of these internalized beliefs that most women don't even realize they have at this point, because of how inundated the culture has become with some of these really intense feminist ideas. You now see, if you even mention patriarchy, a lot of women go straight to, oh, that means the man is going to walk all over me. Yeah. That means I'm going to be isolated from my family and friends. I'm not going to have a life. I'm going to be abused. It often comes back to like, oh, this is going to go straight to abuse, which I think is such a leap to make. Obviously, abuse is a real issue, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about in a loving household with the husband that you chose to marry, that you know is a good man, you should be able to submit to his leadership. And that doesn't mean that you're being put in a inferior position or a lesser position. It's just the organization of the household.
Well, and I remember a point being made a few months ago. You know, women will go to work under a male boss and respect and give him everything he needs to for the job. Obviously, yeah, you're getting a paycheck, but in the same breath, then disrespect your husband or not want to be under your husband's rule. And that's not everybody. Obviously but there are women who, you know, they don't want to be ruled by their husband at home, but they'll go to work and sit under a male boss 40 hours a week at least.
Well, and it's insane because, you know, with your bosses that maybe you're working under, the only thing keeping you there is the paycheck, really. With your husband, with your family, you have vows that you gave before the Lord that are supposed to be for the rest of your life. Vows that not just include, well, I plan to submit to you and you're going to take care of me, but also, you know, there is love involved, there's care involved, and then there's the creation of new life, children. And all of those things I think are so valuable and so rewarding. I don't understand why that's somehow seen as a lesser thing or a less fulfilling thing to honor and to, you know, submit yourself to. I really want to kind of focus on this fearful reaction that women seem to have towards patriarchy. You know, you hear these terms like toxic masculinity and all of this. Anything that screams
which there
manly.
is actual toxic masculinity out there. Don't get me wrong.
For sure.
Andrew Tate is probably the leader of that. And he is not the depiction of masculinity. But
I wouldn't even consider him masculine at all.
No, but the reason why young men are flocking to him is because we've broken this ideal of what real Christian masculinity is supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for women, because again, this feminist leaked into all the culture ideas, there's this fearfulness that comes with someone who just acts naturally masculine. I mean, you look at the Ken and Barbie dolls that we have today versus the Ken and Barbie dolls that you saw in like, the 60s.
Yeah.
Ken used to look masculine.
Right.
He used to, have
buff,
a kind of buff body. And obviously this was a girl's toy. So even then it was still maybe slightly effeminate. But now all the Ken dolls are made to look very, very young. Yeah. They're made to look very feminine.
Yeah.
They're made to look like, Barbie's, girly boyfriend. Like
they almost are nearing like looking like a transgender.
Almost. Yeah. And some of them with, obviously they're kids' toys. So a lot of them have crazy dyed hair. However, I think the effect is, it used to be that Ken and your little G.I. Joe was kind of interchangeable. Yeah. And now they're so vastly different. It's insane. And girls are being taught subliminally that masculinity is something to be afraid of, that masculinity is somehow bad, that if you see a man displaying masculine characteristics, at least within your close proximity, that's something that somehow needs to be tamed or taught out of them. Like, oh, have you trained your husband? I've heard people say that all the time. And that is absurd to me.
Well, and some people would argue that, a truly masculine man is one who displays the fruit of the spirit, who's gentle, loving, kind, good, who's very compassionate. And they'll bring all these traits that would not only apply to a man, but would apply to a 95-year-old grandma as well. Yeah.
Those are traits and terms that apply to men and women, but are there uniquely masculine traits and are there uniquely feminine traits? Yes. And how do we lean into those things? It's been really a sweet season for me as I've been considering, we just had a baby boy and we also have a daughter, and considering even at this age, how different they are from each other and how important the different roles that they're going to take on in their lives are. I don't want to raise my sons the way I raise my daughters.
Yeah.
And I think even in the way we educate them, there should be differences. They should be reading different books. They should be reading things that enforce these, masculine and feminine roles and give them heroes to look up to in that. For a girl, it says often in the Bible, you want a virtuous woman. So what are those virtues? What are the feminine virtues? Yeah. And I want to enforce those things. Chief among them being a submissive and a gentle and quiet spirit. And those are terms that women are offended by.
You just hearing them said,
it makes this cringe for a lot of women because again, fear.
What do you mean? I have to be gentle and quiet, and you're taking away my rights, and I can't do this and I can't do that. And we've seen this influx, and the fruit of this has been divorce. It's been abortion.
Yeah.
It's been all these sexual rights, all these things that have progressed since about World War II, when we were in the middle of the war and the women began to enter the workforce. And when they entered the workforce after the war was over, they realized, hey, I don't need a man to do this for me. I can do it myself.
Well, and with the suffragettes and all of that, not saying that women shouldn't have the right to vote, that women shouldn't have rights. However, it's now pendulum swung so far of, when you look at a little girl, if someone walks up to our daughter and, they ask her, one of the first things they ask a kid is, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Right.
And the assumption is not that mom is a valid option, that wife is a valid option.
Yeah.
The assumption is she needs to already at a young age be dreaming of a career to enter the workforce. And why?
Right.
It used to be that the default was that a woman, when she was old enough to be married or when she did get married, the assumption was that she was going to have children and raise her children. And then the exception was when a woman, had certain skills or desires and, went into the workforce for those specific things. Now the assumption is by default, women are going into the workforce. And if you are a wife and mom primarily, then it's, well, I'm just a mom.
Yeah.
I'm just a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
And it's seen as somehow this lesser thing. And language is very powerful.
Yeah, it carries the negative
connotation. The way we use our words changes the perspective on how we think of it. And I don't want to, in front of my daughter, say, I'm just a mom.
Right.
No, I'm a mom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's enough. I want the first question to be asked of her when she's an adult is, do you have kids or do you plan on having kids? That shouldn't be offensive, but it should be encouraging, because when we as a culture get away from a family-centric culture, we see it today, fertility rates are dropping tremendously.
Well, it brings me to another point of the idea of the family in general is such a broken thing. And this, along with the nation itself, I think is going to eventually heal itself.
Yes.
To bring us back to what really matters. Mm-hmm. You don't have a nation, you don't have a culture if you don't have families. And then when you have a family that's Christianized from the husband down, you've got a perfected family, imaging the heavenly on the earthly now.
Yeah.
And the idea of family just seems so foreign that, to steal from Donald Trump, we need to make families great again. Yeah. If we're really going to change anything, we've got to get back to actual, properly ran, biblical family unit where the husband is the head, the husband is the breadwinner, the wife is the educator, and she's taking care of the house. She has a whole house to take care of, which is a great honor. It's not a negative thing. You have a home to take care of.
Yeah, it used to be back in the day when you had household servants and stuff. A home was its own economy, and a housewife was not a drudge, but she was someone who, managed a full staff. She was someone who, had authority, who, really was a manager and, produced a lot of value for her home. You think about Proverbs 31 and the woman described there, she produced both economic value and, family value for her home. Today, the idea of being a housewife is you are a servant, and not that service to your family is a bad thing, but that it's somehow this dreary, lesser than position, when to me, I see that I am cultivating something that's beautiful. I'm cultivating something that's valuable. I am, nourishing my family. I am, providing a home that is lovely to be in, that we can have others over in our home and be able to exercise hospitality, these things that are good and honorable pursuits to have. And when it's reduced in these terms of, like you're turning into a slave in your home, you're framing it wrong. You've got this incredible honor to be over the management of this incredible place that you can create. And especially as a mom who is, very focused on natural foods and all of these things, you garden and you can, and you learn some of these amazing skills from our older women in our community who have been teaching me how to, feed my family in a way that is going to benefit everyone, and that you can't get at a restaurant. You can't get in any other place other than if you commit yourself to feeding your family healthy foods. And that's just one example.
You're literally providing the health and the longevity of the family.
Yes.
You're keeping your husband alive longer. You're raising your kids up healthy. You're the heartbeat of the whole house. You're keeping everybody alive.
Yeah. If you look at statistics, men who are married are typically happier and live longer. Yeah. And that's the effect of having a wife who has committed herself to serving her husband. And that, again, doesn't have to be a bad thing. We hear these terms of service, of submission, and there's this knee-jerk reaction I've seen from a lot of women of that they're being looked down upon, that they're going to be forced to do things they don't want to do. And that's just not the case. I respect you and I submit to you, but you love me and you care for me, and you've never put me in a position where you asked me to do something that was going to lower me in dignity, that was going to lower me in the eyes of others. And you've asked me to do things that maybe I didn't in the moment agree with, but when I chose to submit, the Lord was able to show me the wisdom of the direction you were taking our family. And I'm so grateful for your leadership.
Yeah, there's so most of our listeners probably go to our church, but for those who don't, we are the worship team. We are the worship leaders, which, in some church circles, they would even be against her being a worship leader in the church. But the way that God has formed us in our marriage is she was raised doing worship in the church, and I was a musician. I was a bass guitar player before I was ever actually a guitar player and a singer. And he brought us together in this what seemed like this picture perfect world, or we're just going to be happy and do music together. And
the first year of our marriage was mostly us figuring out how to do music together, which I feel like was this cauldron of us learning how to do marriage well, because I thought I knew everything. And you were, obviously still growing in your worship gifts. And every time I tried to overstep and take control of the show, we had a lot of conflict. And now that we're in a season where you are the, real decision maker within the worship that we do together, you pick the songs, you decide how they're going to go. You value my opinion. However, when I submit that, end of the day, you're the one who makes the decisions. The worship we've done together within the last few years has been amazing.
Yeah.
And it's been a blessing to our congregation.
You have this worship gift your whole life. God is raising me up to be a musician and a worship leader and a pastor. We're brought together. We've been married for 7 years, just about, and we've done worship ever since.
It's crazy, 7 years.
I mean, we started doing worship before we really got married, but now we do it, twice a week regularly on top of that. But the structure now, God has given you this amazing gift, and he's entrusted that gift to me ultimately because I'm the head over you.
Yeah.
And now I've got to trust the wisdom from God to, okay, we're going to lead the church in music, which is a huge part of us in this. Music is such a big, important part of our role as Christians in this world because we're singing to our risen King. So it's not just, I just got to pick some songs and we'll come together on Sunday. It's a huge responsibility to be the music leader of your church because you are leading the people into battle. You are leading the people into the victory. We're praising into the victory of Christ. Christ has already won. The victory is done. He's rose from the grave, and now we're worshiping for that. So he's given me this amazing gift that you have, and now he's given me the wisdom through his word to structure it so that, okay, I know how to use what you've got, and I've got to use wisdom to put that all together perfectly. And then you're submissive to the final thing that I come up with. And it's not that we don't talk through things. It's not that, and it's not even
and
that
it's
you
not
don't
that I don't get to have an opinion because everyone who's done worship with us knows that I do.
Yeah, for sure.
However, at the end of the day, and this is still a learning process for me too, and I have to apologize sometimes when I get a little over gung-ho.
Well, we always do that.
Yeah, we always do that. But it's been such a blessing for me to be able to, take the step back, and I'm actually more blessed doing it this way now. Someone might ask, but what if you wanted to, be the one in charge? And I would say, certainly there might be a woman who, maybe she has this sphere that she wants to be over, and maybe the Lord has given her to do that. But at least in our situation with something that we do together, and I think this is just an example for the larger picture of our marriage, when I gave over those things that maybe once upon a time I wanted to maintain control over, I wanted to be the one who made all the music decisions, and I wanted to be the one to pick the songs, I, over time, started really burning out doing those things. I had other focuses. I wanted to focus on, raising our children, on managing our home. And it became this really big chore that I no longer got joy from. However, being in a season where I get to show up and do the things that you've put together, I get to both focus on our family and the things that really bring me joy. And I get to experience the joy of singing and doing this music together without having the pressure of, I have the authority, I have to make the decisions, I have to schedule the people, I have to do all this. And again, that's not to say that there aren't women who, have specific callings to, manage businesses or whatnot. But within our experience, I've found that there's a lot more restfulness for me and for our lifestyle to surrender those things that once upon a time I had thought I was just going to, be in control of. And
well, let's talk about that for a second, because that's our life. So that's what God has called us to do. And we get to every week model that to the congregation of wifely submission to husband and parental role over our children. We'll get into the children. There's a really important aspect about training your children to go to church, which is, you have to do that.
But we'll circle back.
Yeah, we'll get back to
We'll
that.
circle back.
What I wanted to say is we don't live, this is challenging because we don't live in a culture today. Everything in the culture is going against the family.
Yeah.
So the idea of a one income family it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
Most people cannot live on a $45,000 a year salary, 50,000 maybe. I mean, 50,000 I think is still like the poverty line. And, pay their $1,200 rent or their $1,200 mortgage and whatever. Maybe there's a car payment, and then all the bills.
Yeah.
And function with just the husband going to work while the wife stays at home. And this is what's really challenging for people, because maybe they do want to do this, but they don't know how to do it.
Yeah. So obviously within the subtext of this, we promote and we prefer the structure of, a stay-at-home mom taking care of her children in her home while the husband goes to work. That, I think for a lot of people, a lot of Christians, would be the preferred model. However, there are some people who, because of maybe health issues or because of financial stress, that's not always possible.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is not like some hard, fast rule and like, how dare you not follow the structure.
We realize we live in a day and age where that is just, we need to keep this mindset to create this paideia of God, as Doug Wilson would call it, where we've created this godly culture to where our kids and our grandkids, it won't seem like a foreign thing, but that'll be the natural thing. But we're in the front lines battling this in the culture right now, and we have to chip away at this slowly, and it's going to look different for every situation.
Yeah, every situation is going to look different, but I think the baseline here needs to be that these other situations, these more uncommon situations, should be, and we should work towards them being the exception, not the rule.
Right.
And for many families that I've talked to who have made the decision to have mom stay home, they're not rich.
No.
Husband does not make a ton of money, but you make the decision of, is there more value in us educating our own children? Is there more value in us raising our own children than there is in us making so-and-so amount of money?
Yeah.
And you make sacrifices for that. And the Lord always makes it work. God is so faithful. And sometimes it takes a step of faith to say, I'm going to do this for the good of our children because they're worth it.
Yeah.
And they're worth a lot more than having a really cushy living situation right now. So maybe it's being in a smaller apartment. Maybe it's sharing a car, whatever that looks like for your family. The Lord has blessed us tremendously to always seem to connect the dots when we've lived in situations where we were making barely anything when we were in California, and yet somehow I was still able to stay home with our children. And He always made it work. God always made it work. He's so faithful.
One of the things I think for our generation, the millennial generation, that we need to remember and keep in mind is that patience, we need patience so bad, and we can't look at these other lives around us and desire to have everything right now. I got to have the car, I got to have the boat, I got to have the house, I got to have the ATV, I've got to have the 5 kids. I need it all right now. And that's just kind of what the culture is producing. We live in a right now culture where we want these things.
It's even the same for women. You have girls who are straight out of high school being pushed to go to college and invest in huge careers that in a few years, they're going to be in their best years for having children. And now they're going to have student loans that they can't get out of. And so, when I'm talking to some of our teenagers, I try to advise them, don't just go to college to go to college. You can always go to college later. You've got a whole rest of your life to do that. And I know several moms who have gotten secondary education later in their life after their children are more grown, after they've, invested into those younger years and into those years that are so crucial for having children in a day when fertility rates are dropping. I think it's so important to remember you don't have to do it right away. You don't have to right here, right now, immediately get the education. You can get it later. You don't have to immediately have the big house. You can get the big house later when the Lord opens up those doors, when, you know, you've been at a job for a long time and maybe are able to move up. To assume that you have to have your financial ducks in a row before you can even have kids is another one of those lies in our country right now.
Same thing for being married. I am a strong advocate of getting married when you're young. I'm a strong advocate of don't have a 2-year-long engagement. No. Get engaged and get married. You know, I hope I want to raise my kids to get married and have children young. I mean, early 20s. And this aspect of like, but I got to go out and I've got to go live my whole life and do all those things.
I have to travel and I have to get my degree and I have to be financially established in whatever career that I want to be in. I think that's such a lie, because we start to believe that you can't go through those hard days of establishing yourself and maybe not having a lot of money and only eating ramen. You have to go through those as a single person and you can't do them together.
Yeah.
And I think we steal from ourselves the ability to do it together. Right. It's easier together.
Right.
And, you know, even if you're in college, you can do college together, married.
And
the lie that somehow hard things shouldn't be saved for marriage, that you can't do marriage and do hard things at the same time, is such a lie, because hard things are easier when shared.
I said this on the episode last week, that though the whole world is against you, God is for you. So we're never alone in our families. And when we have kids, we're never alone. So when you're, and this is another thing, that the price is the economy. Everything discourages families from wanting to have kids because it costs too much. But God will provide. Yeah. God wants to take care of that child more than you want to take care of that child. And we walk by faith, not by sight. Yes. Doesn't mean we walk in stupidity and we walk in brazen, like I'm just going to live on a whim and arbitrary decisions.
And there are obviously situations where mom has to work and maybe dad has health concerns, or maybe you need both incomes at the moment because of medical bills or because of, you know, whatever situation that you're in. Obviously, these situations are real and they happen and are completely valid for that family. And I've seen parents who are both working really find ways to work their schedules so that they are still primarily taking care of their kids, and they work hard to do it. Yeah. You know, they are still putting their family first, and I respect that and love that for them. I simply, especially am talking to young people who are making these decisions and deciding what direction they want to go in their life, I really want them to feel encouraged and feel that it's a good decision to move towards building a family at the beginning.
The desire to want to have a family and kids is a good thing. And that needs to be, when we find young people like that, we need to pour into that and give them every good thing that God has provided for them to make that happen. So we've talked about a lot already, but education, I want to touch on this a little bit.
It goes hand in hand with the idea of being a stay-at-home mom. If you're going to be at home with your children to raise your children when they're young, I think it naturally follows that you want to be a part of their education and ensuring that it is of the quality and of the foundation that you really want it to be. You know, when we're working within youth groups and around many youth-aged kids today, we're seeing the effect, and I can't tell you how many young people that we've seen over the years who, coming out of the public school, can barely read or have no reading comprehension. And that's just one aspect of, I think, where our public schools have failed, not just in educational quality, but also in the indoctrination that they provide for children. And we see
this so much effect from it. Everybody who's in the public school are bad. I think there's a lot of well-meaning people. There's good teachers. But the institution in general, since it's been developed in the late 1800s, late 19th century until now, has become corrupt and has become so sideways from, I think, what they originally wanted it to be. And we got away from the way education used to be before that, with parents raising their children.
Again, I don't want to put stigma on parents who use the education system because they're working or whatever. But I think it's important that if you're considering, wanting to choose between do I educate my own child? Am I qualified to do so? Or should I send them to school? I would say that the higher quality education and the education that you would desire the most should be when you teach your own children. You know, you send your kids to kindergarten, first grade, and they're sent home with a mountain of homework.
Yeah.
Why? Because they know that, especially when you're teaching your children to read, they can only do so much, but parental involvement is really what's going to help teach them the most, which is why even after hours at school, you still need to teach them at home and do all this homework with them, because at the end of the day, no one can teach your children better than you. And I think that's what I'm hoping listeners will absorb. And, you know, a good many of the families at our church homeschool. And of course, there's a good many who use the public school. And we have a lot of incredible Christians in our community who are teachers at the school. And I don't want to in any way look down on that. We have great sports programs and all of that. But I think when you're making a measured decision, if you have the ability to make the decision, that you should lean towards homeschooling.
Yeah, I think the idea of you sending your child off for 40 hours a week to be taught by a school, if you're a Christian, at the very least, you need to know what they're learning. You need to know, you know, I never understood the whole idea of going to school for 8 hours a day and then coming home to do homework instead of just doing it in the classroom and the teacher teaching you in the classroom. But you need to be involved. You need to know what are your children learning at this school and what are they doing? And there's a lot of, here's the counter arguments. One of the big counter arguments, and this is slowly dying off because we're starting to see it doesn't even matter anymore because relevance in the culture is not necessarily a good thing. But it's like, oh, well, if you homeschool your kids, then they're not going to know how to live in the culture. They're not going to know.
They're going to be socially deprived.
Yeah,
they're not going to know how to act around people. As someone who was homeschooled myself, that sort of social awkwardness that has become the stigma for homeschoolers in years past, I think is less and less valid, especially
you're way more social than I am. And I went to public school all the way. I was homecoming king. I was cool when I was in school.
Oh, so cool.
Yeah. And I am not a social butterfly like you are.
Well, and I think with homeschooling, what helps is when you're plugged into a local church. If we just homeschooled and my mom wasn't intentional about, getting me around other kids, getting me around especially other adults, and I could have conversations with adults without being freaked out. I think the same is true today. And, there are so many resources available to homeschoolers today. Our daughter is involved in a Christian homeschool co-op, and we once a week get together with other families. She gets to practice all of these, social interactive skills. And she's taught by us how to be socially well-developed. But I also think for a majority of kids who are growing up in the public school system, unless parents are really intentional, most of them come out of public school and are really only comfortable talking to kids their age.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
When they're with kids who are younger than them, they're like, oh, little kids freak me out, or what. And this isn't everyone, obviously. And when they're with adults, they feel like they can't have an adult conversation with them without feeling awkward or feeling like they don't know what to say. And growing up, that was never the case for me. We would go volunteer at the senior center. We would be at church. I would help with greeting, serve in the hospitality ministries, serve in Sunday school. And I felt comfortable interacting with anyone of any age. And, we're already seeing this for our 4, almost 5-year-olds where, she will talk to anyone. She is extremely socially adept, and I would have it no other way.
Yeah, and another thing that people fall back on is, and I'm going to relate this to fathers and husbands again, is they don't feel equipped, right? I don't have a master's. I'm not a teacher. I'm not equipped to teach my children. But that whole precedent thing comes from the culture and comes from the schooling system anyways. You are the most equipped person to teach your child because you're their parent. You have the God-ordained anointing on your life to teach your children. It's the same aspect for husbands and fathers that don't feel equipped to lead their families spiritually and physically and emotionally. Yes, you are equipped because you're ordained by God to do it, and it's you don't have to make it so complicated in your head.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated. And reason number one being, you're not the one who has to write the curriculum. You're not the one who has to set the lesson plans. There are incredible resources that we have today.
Really
even
are.
compared to when I was homeschooled, there are even more amazing Christian homeschool resources that are more than just two to choose from. There's multitudes to choose from that are fantastic.
More and more are showing up.
Highly recommended resources, and the same for a father who's wanting to lead their family spiritually, wanting to teach them the word. There are books and Bible studies and devotionals and all sorts of resources that you can use to help teach your kids. One that we're using currently for our family is you're leading our daughter through catechism currently. And that's, special.
Kids Westminster Catechism. And it's just, the catechism is a series of questions that you ask your child, like, who is God? Who are you? What did God create you for? What is your ultimate end in this life? How did sin show up? And you go through this list of questions and I'm going to use the word indoctrinating, but that's okay. That's
you absolutely are. We should.
I'm teaching her who God is through a series of questions that we go through, and I'm doing it on a kid's version, and it simplifies the questions for her level. But when she gets older to the teenage years, she'll be able to understand those questions on a deeper, more academic level. Yeah. But it's simple. It's so simple. And
and it's this beautiful time that she looks forward to. She's always begging to do catechism.
Honestly,
on the nights when we're dead tired, she's like, "Let's do catechism." And it's this sweet time for her to spend with you as well, and for her to have reinforced that you are the spiritual leader of our home. And when she has a question about the word, about the Bible, obviously she can ask mom, but it's even more special to ask dad because he's going to have insights that I might not even have. And I think just to have that hierarchy of to bring your spiritual questions to the spiritual leader of the home, I think is valuable. And I try and do the same when, I'm reading or listening through the 1 Year Bible of the day. If I run into something that I'm like, does this connect to this, or have a question about something that maybe I didn't notice before, or maybe have something I think I've figured out, but want to check with you. You quite often inform me of things that you've learned within your own studies.
Well, and you have spent many more years in the church than I have. You graduated Bible college way before I did, so it was kind of a catch up thing for me in my biblical knowledge to. I don't want to say achieve this place of where I know more, but of just getting comfortable and familiar with the Bible, which is why we as a church and as a family really encourage the 1 Year Bible. So people are reading through it. Yeah. But this idea of educating your children has to start at this place of family worship. Now, Vodi Bakum is phenomenal with this idea of family worship, with fathers being the shepherds of their families, and with education, homeschooling, he was a big voice for that as well. But worship isn't just where we go to church. It's super important that we go to church as families, and it's super important for the children to see their dads and their moms worshiping together, singing and worshiping, sitting and taking notes during the Bible study, sitting in and if you're not able to sit in the sermon for 40 minutes or through prayer for 10 minutes, well, your kids are they're always looking up to you. They're never going to be able to do it unless you teach them how to do it.
Yeah, you have to lead the way in those things.
The aspect doesn't just end at the gathered service on Sunday. It is a weekly thing. So what we go through on Sunday, we get to weekly do with our house. We get to weekly have worship. We get to weekly discuss the Bible. We get to weekly fill our home with music. We get to weekly, do these things on a daily basis, actually, of just showing our children the Lord. And it's not complicated. You find yourself a book. There's tons of good books out there, devotional books. There's plenty of good authors out there, and you just sit down for 10 minutes, maybe before the kids go to school or before you leave for work, and you read it together, and that's it.
Well, and in the season that I'm in right now, with there being an infant at home and then a 4, almost 5-year-old, having quiet alone time, unless I wake up at 5 a.m, is unrealistic on most days. However, I've found that it's been such a blessing to bring my children into that devotional time and do it together. And what we've been doing this year is listening to the 1 Year Bible together. Just turn on the audio Bible. We listen to it together. I'll ask them questions. I'll ask Jane questions of, what she is hearing. Sometimes she asks me questions of, well, what does that word mean? Who is this person? Oh, I remember that from Sunday school. It's really cool to see the fruit of sharing that family worship time together.
Yeah. And all of these things that we're talking about, when our focus is on our families, of what God has called us to do, and perfects the family unit when it becomes Christian. And another very important thing to understand is that the statistics show that when the husband becomes a Christian, the likelihood of the family following is very high.
It's like 90-something%, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. And we had this conversation, and not that I'm against children's ministry, but the church focusing on the husbands should be priority.
Yeah. I think, majority of the outreaches that you'll see are aimed at kids. Majority of, a lot of the functions that we create are aimed at maybe women or kids or maybe the family together. But the more we as a church, and this kind of circles back to the idea of patriarchy, the more we focus on building up fathers, building up men, building up the boys in our church to become men,
right?
The more we're going to see actually solid Christian families that are, powerfully moving in our culture and in our community for the gospel. Because at the end of the day, and the numbers prove it, a household led by a godly man rarely it will fall.
Right.
And if we as women are able to, instead of feeling threatened by having a man running the show, but instead get behind it and say, what can I do to, further empower my husband to make decisions, to be the spiritual leader, to lead our home, lead our community. I think I see within our own relationship, I've seen so much success for us in those things. When I can say, in worship, for example, if someone comes up and they're like, wow, that worship was so great. And I'm able to say, my husband has worked so hard on putting these services together, and I'm really so thankful for his leadership to redirect things to promote and lift up the leadership of our husbands. And then within, obviously our personal relationship, when I can take the step to say, what do you think? What do you think our family should go in the direction of? I'm empowering you to make those decisions. And I think it blesses our household. And I think the ripple effects from that also shows our daughter, and will show our son, and any future children we have, that there is beauty and cooperation and a really easy flow of life when I can take that step back and say, I feel like it does a disservice to even say take a step back, because I'm not losing anything.
Right.
But to push you forward and to say, husband, lead the way, and then we walk together, I think is so powerful. And our children are going to grow in confidence because of it. We're going to see a daughter who knows exactly who she is, who's not trying to prove herself to anyone, because she's got a strong father and a mother who love each other, who care for their children, who are focused on the things that God has given them. She's going to be confident. She's not going to fall for, just any dude who tells her she's pretty, but she's going to know to look for characteristics like her dad's.
Right.
And our son is going to grow up knowing exactly what it means to be a strong Christian man, to bear masculine traits, just the way Jane will bear feminine traits. And those are good things.
Yeah. And in all of this conversation and all of these things we've talked about, I think this ties directly back to the last couple conversations I had with Mark about the nation being Christian and how we change things, how we need to have our mentality set on, okay, how can I change the influence around me to be more honoring to God and to Christ? Oh, thank you. You hear this a lot. People look around at our society today, and indeed it is dark. Yes. And there are a lot of problems out there. And they'll say, yeah, this is the church's fault. This is the church did this. But you can't pass all the blame on the church if husbands and wives aren't doing their duty to live a biblical life outside of the church. Look, the church can only do so much. The church is there to equip you to do the work of the ministry outside of its doors. Yeah. You can't sit around and wait for the church to fix everything. If the church is leading you in worship and providing you the sacraments of the word and communion, the church is doing its job. Yeah. It's then your job as parents to church your family, Christianize your family, build your family up. And as we see this, I like saying this, we take America back one family at a time.
Yeah. And I think when we look at America and we look at the problems that we consider most grievous in our nation, we think about, gender issues, about homosexuality, we think about abortion, and then some of these other cultural problems that have really decayed our nation. If we look at the history of it, a lot of it leads back to the institution of feminism and that movement and the sexual revolution and all these things that have really eroded the family bedrock of our culture. And we see fatherlessness at an all-time high. We see divorce at an all-time high. All of these things, I think, you'll find subtly influenced by this desire for, women to be liberated, but in doing so, they're putting themselves in a new kind of bondage.
And this is where I would say the church has failed, especially in America. Unfortunately, big EVA, that means big evangelicalism, which means big church in America, mega churches, the ones who have big voices. Most of the people, you go to a bookstore and you see all these authors' names that are really popular. They've allowed this to happen, and they've embraced these ideas of wokeism, and they've allowed women to take roles in the church that they aren't supposed to have.
Yeah. And again, that's not to look down on women or to say that women are not capable or spiritual or any of these things. But when we fall within the God-ordained roles that we have, all of these good things naturally flow out of it. And especially when, women are so focused on every other ministry outside of them, every other relationship outside of them, other than their husbands and their children, you start to see things fall out of balance. And as just in the larger picture, I'm not talking about specific families. Again, every family is different. I'm not trying to call out people who maybe are not able to stay at home. There are other ways to prioritize your family and your children. But by and large, in the larger picture, if you have a wife that is pushing so hard to have her big career and to receive validation from outside her family, from outside the roles that are the most blessed to have, you see this reaction in the way husbands maybe withdraw, find their own validation in maybe their job or in their friendships, and pull away from the family because, the wife is the girl boss and she runs the whole show and she runs the family and she runs the job and she runs her social media. She has all these things that she's juggling because, we were made to be multitaskers. Yeah. And suddenly it's, I don't really need you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and
exactly right.
How demoralizing is that for a number of men who now suddenly their job is just to meet emotional needs.
Right. Which men aren't very good at that. That's just how God made us. We do our best, but women are so much more, they're the emotional, we have to bear that emotional weight for our families. Absolutely. But it's, I think that's part of the sanctifying process that God's given us in our life.
There have been a number of newlyweds that I've talked to, and when they're getting ready to get married, they have all these expectations of like a Disney relationship where the guy is just as emotionally attuned as she is and can just like totally know what she's going to feel next and meet that need. And this is why we see a lot of divorces coming out of just people not being happy, because you think your happiness is going to come from, this emotional validation when it should be from the duty and the honor that we, serve one another in. And the validation comes from the Lord, from being faithful. And obviously our relationship is a blessing to each of us. I love you, you love me, and those things are there. However, it's not the emotions that are carrying us through our marriage that, you know, I hope to last until the day one of us dies, both of us dies, the Lord comes back, one of those. But if we keep it centered on these duties rather than the emotions, there's never going to come a day that you're going to be so emotionally disappointing to me and haven't met that whatever imaginary need I've made for myself.
Those days.
They come and then they go.
Yeah.
And then the day moves on and we're fine. I have to remind young women that the emotions that you're going to see out of your husband are going to look different than your very feminine emotions. You know, when I get overwhelmed, it comes out as tears. When you get overwhelmed, it comes out as anger and frustration. And those differences between the way your feminine emotions act and the way a masculine person experiences life are going to be so different. And that doesn't make him a bad person or you a bad person. And to expect your husband to function the way a woman functions emotionally is, I think, a real disservice.
Which is exactly what the culture is demanding.
Oh, yeah.
And unfortunately, what most of the big evangelicalism in our country is falling for and telling men that they need to be more feminine.
Rather than, you know, we're teaching men how to be attuned to feminine emotional waves, but we should be teaching also women how to understand what a masculine spirit looks like, how to function around that, how to be comfortable under the protection and the strength that a man of the home brings to a household, and that those are good things, that those are, you know, if someone broke into our home, thank God I have a strong and courageous husband who can defend our family. Thank God that I have a husband who, if someone were to try to mislead our family in a lie or in some kind of subversion, that you have the wisdom and the leadership to call that out and to say, you know what, this is not a healthy direction for our family and we need to pull back.
Yeah. Amen. Well, we'll wrap it up. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. And we'll be back on Thursday. I'm going to be doing a special episode with a friend about homeschooling more particularly and what his experience has been in life. He's also a youth pastor and has been married, and he's a dad, and his kids are all grown up. So he has a lot more experience than I do, or we do. So it'll be good to hear from him. So you guys all stay cool. Remember, go to church, take your family to church, worship with your family at home, and have more babies. See you later.